The dinner table was set with white candles and silverware that caught the light. 20 people had come to celebrate my husband Daniel's 50th birthday, and everything looked perfect until Carol lifted her wine glass. "Some women dream of Paris," she said, loud enough for the whole table. "Others should be grateful for Walmart and church potlucks." Nervous laughter moved around the room. I felt heat rise in my face. I looked at Daniel. He picked up his fork and said nothing. I swallowed the humiliation quietly, the way I had learned to. But something inside me shifted that night, like a lock turning in a dark room. Because Carol had no idea that just 3 weeks earlier, I had submitted my application for the Hartwell International Arts Fellowship, the very program she had mocked at dinner the month before, calling it a fantasy for women with too much time on their hands. I had applied anyway. I had told no one. My name is Paula Hendricks. I am 44 years old, and I grew up in Millbrook, a small town in Kentucky where everyone knew your name and no one expected you to leave. If you are new here, please subscribe to this channel. I share real stories every single week that will stay with you long after you've heard them. Now, let me tell you everything that happened. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store when the email arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March, and the sky was gray and flat above the parking lot. I had just finished buying ingredients for Daniel's favorite pot roast, trying to feel normal in a life that had started to feel very small. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the sender, Hartwell International Arts Fellowship Committee. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. 6 months in Paris. Fully funded. Housing, travel, and a monthly stipend. I had been selected from over 400 applicants across the country. I sat in that cold car for a long time. I should have felt pure joy. Instead, I felt something complicated, a mix of excitement and a fear so deep it settled in my chest like a stone. Daniel did not believe in what he called impractical fantasies. He had said it many times, always calmly, always with that patient look that meant the conversation was already over. And Carol would see this as a betrayal, a personal insult, a disruption of everything she believed my life should look like. But there was something else troubling me. As I read the email a second time, one line stood out. Despite certain external inquiries received during the review period, my stomach dropped. Someone had tried to contact the program about me. The following week, I received a phone call from the fellowship's program coordinator, a kind woman named Beverly. She said she wanted to speak with me privately before I signed any paperwork. "We received a call about 2 months ago," Beverly said carefully. "The caller raised concerns about your emotional stability and your marital responsibilities. She suggested that the fellowship would interfere with your home life and that you might not be able to fulfill the commitment." I gripped the phone tighter. "What did you say to her?" "We take every inquiry seriously, but we also look for patterns." The caller gave enough identifying details that our team was able to trace the number to a private line registered in Millbrook, Kentucky. I already knew. I had known before she finished her sentence. Carol, my husband's stepmother, the woman who had spent 12 years deciding who I was and what I was capable of from the outside. "We want you to understand," Beverly continued, "that the call did not harm your application. In fact, when our panel reviewed everything together, the attempted interference made your candidacy stronger. Your essay already spoke to resilience. This confirmed it." I thanked her and sat very still after the call ended. Carol had tried to stop me quietly from behind a curtain, and it had backfired completely. But then Beverly said something that changed everything. "Mrs. Hendricks, we have reason to believe someone close to you was aware of the call before it was made." That evening, I waited for Daniel to come home from the hardware store. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I had told myself to stay calm. But when he walked through the door smelling of sawdust and cold air, I just looked at him and asked one question. "Did you know Carol called the fellowship program about me?" He set his keys on the counter slowly. He didn't deny it. "She was worried about you," he said. "She thought it would help." "Help who?" I asked. He ran his hand over the back of his neck. "Look, Paula, I didn't think you'd actually get in. I didn't want to make it a whole thing if it wasn't going to matter." There it was. He had known. He had stayed quiet. He had assumed I would fail, and that the problem would take care of itself. It's just a phase, he added. The moment those words left his mouth, something inside me went very still and very cold. Not angry, not close to tears, just still. A phase. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of folding myself into the shape this family needed. And all of my own dreams, the quiet ones I had carried for so long, were just a phase to the man who was supposed to know me best. I nodded slowly. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. But I had already made a decision. I was not going to ask anyone's permission for what came next. The morning I left for Paris, Carol told her sister, loudly enough for the neighbors to overhear, that I was having a midlife crisis vacation and would be back with my tail between my legs within the month. Daniel did not drive me to the airport. I asked him once. He said he had a delivery scheduled and couldn't rearrange it. I stood in our kitchen with my suitcase at the door and looked at him across the room, and I understood that this was his answer, not just about the airport, but about everything. I called a cab. My neighbor Ruth walked over from next door and hugged me in the driveway without saying a word. She pressed a small card into my hand. Inside it said, "Go. Just go." I held that card all the way to the terminal. At the gate, I called my daughter Becca to tell her I loved her. Then I texted Daniel that I had checked in safely. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I put my phone into airplane mode. When the plane lifted off and Millbrook disappeared under the clouds, I didn't cry. I felt something strange and clean move through me, a feeling I hadn't recognized in a very long time. Clarity. That was all. Just clarity. Paris was not a dream. It was real, overwhelming, and nothing like I had imagined, and I loved it all the more for that. The cobblestones hurt my feet. The coffee was too strong the first week. My French was embarrassing. I got lost on the metro twice in my first 3 days and stood on wrong platforms feeling completely out of my depth. But I showed up every single day. I attended every seminar, every workshop, every late evening panel where artists and educators argued passionately about ideas I had only read about before. I took notes in small notebooks and asked questions I had been too afraid to ask for years. By the 3rd month, I had found my footing. I was contributing in ways that surprised even me. I wrote an essay about arts education in rural American towns, places like Millbrook, places that had been quietly starving for programs and resources for decades. The fellowship published it in their quarterly journal. Within 2 weeks, I had emails from educators in 4 different states saying my words had put into language something they had been feeling for years. Then came the collaboration offer. The fellowship's director invited me to join a team working to expand a community arts initiative back in the United States. I said yes, without hesitation. But then she mentioned something else attached to the initiative that I had not expected at all. The fellowship's director was a sharp, warm woman named Dr. Adiz Nwosu. She called me into her office one afternoon in late October and slid a printed document across her desk. "We want you to apply for the executive director role," she said. "Stateside. Your job would be to launch this program in underserved American communities, rural areas specifically." I looked down at the page. The role involved overseeing grants, managing a growing staff, and building partnerships with local schools and civic leaders. It was the kind of real, meaningful leadership I had been doing quietly for years inside my own home, with no title and no credit. "There are a few towns we've already identified as ideal launch sites," she continued. She slid a second page across. One of the names on the list was Millbrook, Kentucky. I looked up at her. "Yes," she said, with a quiet smile. "Your essay is partly why it's there." The salary attached to the role was 3 times what I currently made at the part-time art center position I had held in Millbrook for 7 years. I asked for a week to think. But sitting on my narrow bed in my fellowship apartment that night, I knew the real question was not whether to take the job. It was what taking it would mean for my life back home, and whether I was finally ready to face that answer. Carol started liking my social media photos in November. "Not quietly," she commented. Sweet, curious little comments. "So beautiful, Paula, and you look wonderful, and so proud of our girl." Our girl. I stared at that phrase for a full minute before I kept scrolling. Daniel began calling more often too. Not long calls, just check-ins. How was the weather? Was the food agreeable? Did I need anything from home? His voice carried a softness it hadn't held in months, maybe years. I was not cold toward him, but I had learned, slowly over those months in Paris, to observe before I reacted. Then, one evening in late November, Daniel mentioned on a call that things were a little tight at home. The small contracting business he had been running for 8 years had lost 2 major clients back to back. He was working to bring in new work.
Nothing to worry about, he said.
I said I was sorry to hear it and hoped things turned around quickly. I kept my voice neutral. But after the call ended, I sat by my apartment window for a long time, watching the city lights below, thinking. Daniel never mentioned money to me unless something had already gone wrong. Not tight wrong. The other kind, the kind that had been building quietly underneath for a while. I started paying much closer attention. When I flew home briefly for Christmas, something about the house felt different. Small things at first. A piece of furniture gone from the hallway, a quietness around the dinner table that hadn't been there before. I asked Daniel about the business. He said it was being restructured. He chose that word carefully, like a man picking his way across a frozen pond. That night, when he was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the shared financial accounts on my laptop. What I found made the breath go out of me. Daniel had taken out 2 large business loans over the previous 18 months. Both loans were co-signed. The co-signer was listed as Carol Beaumont, her maiden name, still used for all financial and legal matters. They had used home equity as collateral. Our home. The one both our names were on. I read through the documents 3 times. No one had sat me down and explained any of it. Daniel had signed. Carol had backed him as a silent partner. And I, his wife of 12 years, had been kept completely in the dark. It was not illegal, but it was a deliberate choice they had both made, to move forward without me, using an asset that was as much mine as his. And from everything I could read in those account numbers, the business was not being restructured. It was failing. I returned to Paris in January without saying anything to Daniel about what I had found. Not because I was afraid, because I had learned slowly, over those months, that reacting too quickly was how people like Carol won. Instead, I made a phone call to a financial advisor in Louisville that a fellow program participant had recommended. Her name was Willa Crane, and she specialized in asset protection for women navigating difficult marital and business situations. We spoke for 2 hours over a video call. I explained everything clearly: the loans, the home equity, the hidden debt, the fellowship stipend, and the executive role I was considering. Willa listened without interrupting. Then she walked me through something I had not known before. Because my fellowship income and any future executive salary were entirely separate from Daniel's business accounts, and because I had not co-signed anything, I could legally establish independent financial footing that would fully protect those future earnings if his business collapsed. She told me to open a personal account immediately, document everything I had found, and keep all future income in my name alone. I did exactly that. Over the following 3 weeks, I built a careful, quiet record of every transaction I had uncovered. Then came the call I had been half expecting. A major investor had just withdrawn from Daniel's business entirely. I learned it from Daniel's own business partner before Daniel told me himself. Daniel called on a Wednesday morning, Paris time. I was eating breakfast and watching rain trail slowly down the window. His voice had an edge I recognized, the one he used when he was trying to sound calm about something that was anything but. "We're having a tough quarter," he said. "The investor situation is complicated, but I'm handling it." I told him I was sorry to hear that. I meant it. Then he paused. "Actually, there's something else. Mom had a thought she wanted me to pass along." I put down my coffee cup. "She thinks, since you've got that fellowship stipend coming in steady, you could contribute something temporary, just to keep the cash flow stable while we work on reorganizing things." I understood immediately. Carol, the same woman who had called the fellowship program to try to remove me from consideration, now wanted me to hand that fellowship money back to patch a hole in a failing business she had helped create without my knowledge. The same woman who had stood at a dinner table and said I should be grateful for church potlucks instead of dreaming of Paris. I took one breath. I kept my voice completely even. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I can't do that. Paula. The stipend is tied to specific work obligations here. I can't redirect it. That was partly true. The fuller truth was simpler. I had worked too hard and waited too long to hand my first real independent earnings to people who had never once believed I could earn them. Carol did not accept my refusal quietly. Within 2 weeks, word had reached me through cousins and old neighbors, whispers that Paula Hendricks had gone off to Europe, abandoned her husband in his time of need, and was too selfish to help her own family. She told one relative I had changed for the worse. She told another that Paris had made me think I was better than everyone in Millbrook. I let it circulate. I said nothing publicly. I did not explain myself to anyone who hadn't asked, because something else was happening at the same time. My fellowship essay had been picked up and shared widely by a regional education network. A teacher in eastern Kentucky posted it in a community forum. A school board member shared it from there. A local news site ran a short piece. By February, I had received over 200 messages from people across the region who had read my words and felt seen in them for the first time. Millbrook was paying attention. The town that had never expected me to go anywhere was now watching. And then Beverly called again, this time with something official. The Hartwell International Arts Fellowship Board had reviewed my published work, my community response data, and my application for the executive director role. They were formally offering me the position. The offer letter arrived in my email at 6 in the morning on a Thursday. I read it 4 times before I stood up from my chair. The contract was everything Beverly had described and more. A full relocation package. A housing stipend for the first year. Independent health benefits in my name alone. A salary that made my hands go slightly unsteady as I read the number. For the first time in my adult life, I could stand on completely independent financial ground. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's daughter-in-law. Not as the woman the family tolerated or accommodated or tried quietly to manage. As myself. As Paula Hendricks, professional, capable, and funded by work I had done entirely on my own terms. I thought about what it would cost. Not in money, in the life I had known. Accepting this role meant returning to Millbrook, yes. But it also meant that the marriage Daniel and I had been quietly maintaining through careful distance and polite phone calls could no longer hide behind that distance. It would fracture. Publicly. In the town where everyone knew our names and our history. I thought about Carol's face when she found out. I thought about Daniel's voice the night he called my dreams a phase. I thought about Beverly saying, despite certain external inquiries. I thought about Ruth pressing a small card into my hand in the driveway.
Go.
Just go. I signed the contract. I called Daniel that evening and did not begin with small talk. I'm coming home, I said. I heard him exhale with what sounded like relief. That's great, Paula. We can figure out. I'm coming home to launch the fellowship program. I continued steadily. I've accepted the executive director role. I'll be based in Millbrook. But I won't be returning to things the way they were. I'll need to live separately while the program gets established. There was a long silence. Separately, he repeated. Yes. Another pause. Then, what does that mean for us? It means I need space to do this work properly. And it means some things between us need to be addressed. Honestly this time, not just managed. He said he needed time to think. I told him I understood and gave him 2 weeks. Carol found out the following day. Through Daniel, I assumed. She told whoever would listen that it was divorce drama and that I was using a job title as a convenient excuse to leave without admitting I was leaving. I said nothing publicly in return. But the day I signed a lease on a small apartment across town, I received a text from the editor of the Millbrook Gazette asking if I was available for a short interview. The newspaper had already heard about my appointment. The town was about to find out who Paula Hendricks had become. The article ran on a Thursday morning on the front page of the local section. The headline read, Millbrook native returns to lead National Arts Initiative. The piece was generous and carefully reported. It described the fellowship, the executive role, my published essay, and the rural communities that would benefit from the grant structure I would help design. It also noted that I had been selected over candidates from 12 other states. By noon, my phone had more notifications than I could manage. People I had not spoken to in years were reaching out, former teachers, old neighbors, women I had served alongside on church committees who had never once asked about my ambitions or my work. The same social circles that had laughed nervously at Carol's dinner table jokes were now sending congratulations and saying they had always believed in me. I thanked each one graciously. I corrected no one. Then I noticed something on my program's public event registration page. Carol had submitted her name for a seat at the upcoming community launch event. She had come through the town's Arts Council mailing list, just like everyone else, as if that made it the same. I saw her name on the form. I looked at it for a moment. Then I asked my program assistant, a focused young woman named Tara, to hold the full guest list for my personal review before anything was confirmed. Because I controlled the guest list now. And that was not a small thing. The launch event was held on a Friday evening at the Millbrook Community Center. The room was full. Teachers, local officials, students, journalists, and arts advocates from neighboring counties. I had helped design every part of the evening, down to the order of the program. I stood at the podium and thanked the fellowship board by name. I thanked Beverly and Dr. Nwosu. I thanked the educators who had shared my essay, and the community members who had written to tell me it had reached them. I thanked my neighbor Ruth, who sat in the third row, and watched her press her hand to her heart when I said her name out loud in front of the room. I did not mention Carol. I did not mention Daniel. Not from bitterness. From discipline. That evening belonged to the program and to the people it was built to serve. Afterward, as I moved through the crowd answering questions, Carol appeared at my elbow. She had made it onto the guest list through the Arts Council registration. I had allowed it deliberately. She waited until the crowd thinned around us. Then she leaned in close and asked, quietly, whether I happened to know of any grant resources that might be available to a struggling small contracting business. I looked at her steadily, and without any rush. Everything we offer is publicly listed on our program website, I said. Applications are open to all qualifying businesses in the region. I excused myself and moved on to the next conversation. 3 weeks after the launch, Daniel's business officially declared insolvency. The paperwork moved quickly once it started. Creditors filed claims. The accounts were frozen. The loans Carol had co-signed came due in a way that could no longer be deferred. Because Willa Crane had helped me legally separate my income and all future earnings back in January, none of it touched me. My fellowship salary, my independent accounts, everything I had built since Paris, completely protected. Carol had miscalculated. She had spent 12 years assuming that whatever was mine was also available to her family's needs. She had never once seriously considered that I might one day know how to say no and have the legal structure behind me to make it stick. I felt no pleasure watching the business fail. The people who had worked for Daniel deserved far better than what had happened to them. But I felt something solid settle in me, a quiet recognition that preparation was its own form of power. Daniel texted me one evening in late April. He asked if we could meet for coffee.
I said yes.
We sat across from each other at a small diner on Main Street. He looked tired. The ease that used to sit naturally on him had worn thin, like fabric through too many seasons. He said he wanted to talk about the possibility of reconciliation. On my terms, he added, whatever that meant to me now. I looked at Daniel across that small diner table and tried to find the man I had married somewhere inside the man sitting across from me. He was still there, underneath it all. I could see that. But he was also someone who had stood at a birthday table and said nothing while his stepmother used my name as a punchline. Someone who had known about Carol's phone call to the fellowship and stayed quiet because he assumed I would fail and the problem would go away. Someone who had signed loan documents using our home as collateral without once sitting me down to explain what he was doing. He told me that he had allowed Carol to make decisions for most of his adult life. That it had started when he was young. After his father married her, she had become the center of gravity in the family, and everyone had simply adjusted themselves around what Carol wanted. He had told himself it was easier, that keeping peace was more important than fighting for things. But you mattered, he said quietly. I just never acted like it. I let his words sit in the space between us, without rushing to fill the silence. He asked me what it would take. I told him I had thought about it carefully, and that I did have a condition. One specific thing. He leaned forward slightly.
Tell me, he said.
I looked at him steadily and told him exactly what I needed from him. If there is any path forward for us, I said, I need two things. First, you commit to real counseling, not a session or two, but consistent, serious work with a professional over time. Second, you publicly correct the rumors Carol spread while I was away. You tell the people who heard them that they were not true, that I did not abandon this marriage, that I left to pursue a career I had worked hard to earn. Daniel nodded slowly. He was listening with his full attention. I know the second one won't be easy, I added. It means standing up to Carol. In public. In front of people she cares about impressing. I understand, he said. He reached forward slightly across the table. I can do that, Paula. We left the diner that afternoon without any firm promises, but I felt something unexpected. A small, careful, honest kind of hope. Over the following 2 weeks, Daniel went quiet. I did not chase the silence. I had learned by then that people either move toward what they said they wanted, or they find reasons not to. By the 3rd week he called. His voice was tighter than it had been at the diner. He said he had thought hard about everything I had asked for.
He respected it, he said.
He understood why I needed it, but he could not go up against Carol publicly. He was refusing. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in May. There was no shouting. No dramatic confrontation. No late-night argument where old wounds got dragged back into the light for one last, painful airing. I met with my attorney, signed what needed to be signed, and walked out into the spring morning feeling strangely calm. Not happy. Not exactly relieved. But settled, in a way I had not been in a very long time. The process was legal, clean, and structured. Willa had helped me make sure my finances were fully protected long before this moment arrived. There were no surprises on my side of the paperwork. I had made sure of that months earlier. Daniel's attorney reached out regarding the home. Because the property had been used as loan collateral, the situation was complicated. But my name was on the deed, and my attorney was thorough. We reached a fair, documented arrangement without a courtroom. I moved the last of my things into my apartment on a quiet Saturday morning. I hung a small print above my desk, one I had bought at a street market in Paris during my 2nd month there. 2 women sitting at a cafe table, both looking not at each other but outward, towards something the viewer could not quite see. That evening my phone rang. The number was one I recognized immediately, but had never seen come up on its own, without Daniel's name attached to it as a reason. It was Carol. Her voice was different. That was the first thing I noticed. The sharp edges she always kept just beneath the surface of her words when she spoke to me. They were gone. She sounded tired. And smaller somehow, though nothing about her had changed in size. Paula, she began, and then paused as if searching for what came next. I waited. I've been seeing things, she said finally. The article. The program. All of it. Another pause. You've done well. I thanked her simply. I did not rush to fill the silence with warmth I did not yet have, and I did not make it hard either. I simply let the words be what they were. Then she cleared her throat. With a new program expanding, there will be new roles opening up, yes? New departments, new positions. That's right, I said evenly. Daniel is good with people. He always has been. And with the business closed now, he's looking for, well, I thought that if there was a position that might suit him, and if you had any say in it, you might consider. I understood exactly what she was asking. She was asking me to give Daniel a role in my program. Not through any formal process. Not through earned qualifications. Through her asking me privately, woman to woman, as if the old arrangement still existed between us. As if I were still the person who needed the Walsh family's approval to feel like I belonged somewhere. I kept my voice even. And kind. Carol, I said, every position in our program goes through a formal hiring process. Qualifications, application, interview, committee review. I don't make exceptions for any candidate, regardless of who they are or what connection they have to me. She was quiet. If Daniel wants to apply, I continued. The application portal is on our website. It's open to anyone in the region who meets the listed criteria. I genuinely encourage him to look through what's available. I was not unkind. I was not cold. I simply treated the request the way I would treat any other, with the same rules that applied to everyone. Daniel did apply, about 3 weeks later. His application came through the online portal like every other one. I disclosed the conflict of interest to my hiring committee and removed myself entirely from that part of the review process. He did not meet the minimum qualifications for the role he had applied for. The committee passed on his application through the normal process. I learned this through the standard update system, not through Daniel or Carol. Neither of them contacted me again for some time after that. And for the first time in 12 years, Carol had no angle, no quiet influence she could press into a situation to bend the outcome her way. No family loyalty she could invoke. No disappointment she could deploy. She had nothing left to offer and nothing left to withhold. The silence that followed felt entirely different from every silence that had come before it. 8 months after the program launch, I received an invitation from a European Education Coalition to speak at their annual Regional Leadership Summit. The event brought together presenters and delegates from 14 countries over 3 days. It was held in Paris. The invitation covered all travel, accommodation, and a speaker honorarium. My assistant Tara handled the booking. Business class, because the program's travel policy for executive staff on official engagements was business class, and this was an official engagement. I sat in that wide seat with a warm drink in my hands and the kind of quiet that only feels right when it has been earned, and I thought about the grocery store parking lot in March, the gray sky, the cold car, the shaking hands holding a phone open to an email I had barely dared hope for. I thought about how far that moment was from this one. The week before I flew out, I had stopped by the old house to collect the final items from my divorce settlement. Daniel had been civil and quiet. The house was mostly cleared. On the wall of the small sitting room that Carol had kept for herself during her visits, there was a photograph in a narrow wood frame. An old one. Carol standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, young and bright-eyed, looking a little triumphant. The kind of photo a person keeps because it proves something. Small letters at the bottom of the frame read, 1984. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked up my box and walked out. The summit was the most professionally significant week of my career. I presented to a room of 300 educators and program directors from across Europe and North America. I spoke about rural arts access, about what happens to communities when creativity is treated as a luxury rather than a right, and about what changes when people in those places are given real resources and genuine trust. Afterward, several delegates approached me about potential partnerships. 2 of them led programs in countries I had never visited. I exchanged cards and real conversation and felt, deeply, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. On my last evening in the city, I walked to a cafe near my old fellowship apartment and ordered coffee and a croissant and sat by the window. My phone buzzed softly. A message from Daniel. Not about paperwork or logistics, just 4 sentences. I've been thinking about everything. I know I failed you in ways I'm still trying to fully understand. I'm sorry, Paula. Truly. I read it several times. Then I looked out the window at the street below. People moving past, pigeons scattering, the late light falling at that particular Paris angle that always made everything look a little like a painting someone had been carefully working on for years. I thought about Carol's photograph from 1984. The narrow frame. That young, triumphant face. I picked up my phone. Thank you, Daniel. I typed back. I mean that sincerely. And I did. A month after I returned from the summit, I stood on the balcony of my apartment in Millbrook on a warm June evening. The program had been running for 7 months. We had awarded grants to 11 schools and 3 community centers. I had hired a team of 8 people, all from the region, all talented, all genuinely committed to the work we were doing together. I took a photo, not for social media, not to send to anyone or post anywhere, just for me. A private record of where I was standing and what I had built from a parking lot and a shaking pair of hands and one quiet decision made in the dark. I thought about Carol, lifting her wine glass at that birthday dinner, so certain she knew the shape of my life and the limit of my reach. I thought about Daniel saying phase. I thought about the cold March parking lot, the fellowship email, the cab ride to the airport, and the moment the wheels left the ground. I thought about how far all of those moments were from this balcony. The real victory was never Paris. It was not the title or the article in the Gazette or the way people in town now said my name with different weight, or the business class seat on an international flight. The real victory was the morning I stopped asking for permission. That was the day everything shifted. And no one had handed it to me. Not Carol, not Daniel, not anyone. I had simply decided, in the quiet of my own chest, that I was done waiting for someone else to say I was allowed to go. So I went.